Well, I want to thank you all for being here today. We are here under different circumstances because of the virus. And quite honestly, when we called the press conference, we forgot that we were still operating under a virus. So I am going to start to speak, and as I speak, I'm going to remove my mask, so to let you know that. It also presents some time constraints for us because this room is so small that I am going to try to make our presentation taking those time restraints in mind. Also in the rear of the room, the two college students that were involved in this incident are here, and after we make our presentation, I'm going to ask them to come forward so that you might get a chance to see them and ask any questions that you might have. Also standing here with me is the Public Integrity Unit members, and if you guys would just raise your hands so that people will know you are the unit that was involved in the investigation of this matter. And standing to the right of the Mondo board is the head of that unit, who is Salita Griffin. I agree with Mayor Bottoms, and I agree with our police chief, Erica Shields, when they both have conveyed in so many separate ways that the conduct involved in this incident, it is not indicative of the way that we treat people in the city of Atlanta. And it certainly isn't indicative of the way that we treat our children. And in this case, this incident involved two children. And I'm sure many people might have the question, why today? You know, why are we doing this today? And I want to tell you, one of the reasons that we're doing this today, and one of the reasons that you'll see from our presentation, is because the information is before us. The information that allows us to draw conclusions regarding probable cause, that information is available to us. And that is a lot different from many of the cases that our office handles through our PIU unit, because in many of those cases, there is no body cam information. There is no dash cam videotapes. We don't have witnesses because in those cases, generally, our witnesses are already deceased. And that means that the remaining witnesses are often just police officers. And in many of our cases, in fact, in most of our cases, the police officers refuse to accept interviews with the DA's office. But in this case, it's different because the information is here. And as I say to my fellow prosecutors across the country, if the information is available, people in the communities ask, well, why can't you move forward? And that's what we are attempting to do today. If you'll start. So this incident occurred on the 30th of May of 2020, and it occurred between 9:30 p.m. and 9:49 p.m. And at the end of the presentation, if it is okay with our two victims that are here, we're going to play a portion of the tape so that will indicate the time period that we're talking about in this presentation. So the people involved are three: Chancellor Myers, Taniya, Pilgrim, and Messiah Young. And I believe Ms. Pilgrim and Mr. Young are here today. I do not believe Mr. Myers is here. Is that correct? So the Ms. Pilgrim, who was the owner of the car in this case, her property was damaged, and these are the conclusions that we were able to reach based upon our investigation. It is clear from viewing the information made available to us that during this incident, she was terrified. She was tased And when you get a chance to see the tape, you'll see that it was a vicious act, the tasing. It went on for some time while she was shaking and screaming out in pain. After the tasing took place, she was then taken out of a car and thrown to a paved street, and she was handcuffed with the, what are those things called? Zip ties. I want to get the name right. She was then taken to a police vehicle, a transport vehicle. In the vehicle, there were 3 other women. Ms. Pilgrim asked that she receive a mask since she was in close proximity of the other 3 individuals, and she was not given a mask. She was taken to the Atlanta Detention Center, and during this whole incident, she was never charged by the police department. With respect to Mr. Young, as you might have already observed from the video, he was the driver of the vehicle, and what he attempted to do at the very beginning of the incident was to motion to a friend and to ask him to get into the vehicle, and that young man was Chancellor Myers. And you can hear in the videotape, Mr. Young is asking the police to simply let Mr. Myers get into his car. And at the time, Mr. Myers was being thrown to the ground, and you can hear Mr. Myers crying. And Mr. Young is still asking, could you just let him get in my car? Well, one of the things that we have been able to conclude from the video is that you can actually hear the police tell or say to Mr. Young, go or go to jail. That was what they said to him, was to go or go to jail. And when they said go or go to jail, he then left and he proceeded down the street. But shortly after that, the police caught up with him. They then attempted to force his door open. You can see one of the policemen with an object, a baton, attempt to break into the window, and he struck the window several times. And finally, one of the officers used a device to break the window, and after that happened, Mr. Young was tased by the police. You can see Mr. Young attempting to protect Mrs. Pilgrim, to shield her with his own body while he is being tased as well. The policeman, one of the policemen was able to then pull Mr. Young out of the car onto the pavement, and when he was pulled on the pavement, it looks like much of the force landed on his left arm. And he has now suffered a fracture of his wrists, a very large gash in his left arm, and in fact, he has received 24 stitches from the injuries that he received from being pulled from the car and thrown to the paved street. After he was pulled out of the car, then he was tased again after he was pulled out. Make sure that I can see it. He was zip tied, and he was then escorted to the CNN Center. And in an interview with Mr. Young, he also revealed to us that the officer who escorted him to the CNN Center stood in a position to his rear and punched him more than 10 times in the back as he was being escorted from the CNN Center to the location where he was then taken to Grady Hospital. If you go to the next one. So he waited at the center for about 2.5 hours. He was taken to Grady Hospital, and I believe he remained at Grady until about 7 the next morning. He was then taken to the City of Atlanta Detention Center, Sometime around 10 a.m., he was then brought to municipal court, and he was then informed by the judge for the first time that he was being charged with attempting to elude these officers. And Mr. Young, in his statement, indicated that he was somewhat amazed. He thought that maybe they had gotten him mixed up with somebody else. But shortly after that, he was given a signature bond, and shortly after the signature bond, his charges were dismissed, I believe upon instruction of our mayor, Keisha Bottoms, and Mayor Bottoms has since issued an apology to Mr. Young, Ms. Pilgrim, and their families. So also this case, as we reviewed the evidence, we were able to note some other important considerations. And one of those considerations that kind of gives you a flavor of what was going on in this event, we received a statement from one of the officers who said that he was standing at the rear of the vehicle being driven by Mr. Young, and he saw that the car was placed in reverse and the vehicle tried to come back and hit him, and one of the other officers had to pull him out of the way so that it would save his life. And some of you have gotten a chance to watch the video. We're going to show it again today. And as you can see, while Mr. Young was in the car, he spent most of his time trying to repel the tasers that had been shot into his body. And you cannot see an instance where any attempt was made to run over an officer from the rear. One of the other things that we noted is while the incident took place, there was no mention of a firearm at all. There was no mention of a firearm. But after the incident, when the officers were walking away and returning to their original stations, on the tape, you can hear one of the officers say, "They pulled a gun on us." And when you examine the tape, there is no indication that, that any mention was made of a firearm. And in fact, after the incident, no firearm was ever located on the persons of the two parties, and no firearm was ever located in the vehicle. If you go to the next. So how did we go about making the charging decision? First of all, I want to tell you that we've had outstanding cooperation from the Atlanta Police Department. The body cam videos that we were able to review, the police reports were sent to us by the Atlanta Police Department, and we have been in constant communication with them. We had an opportunity to interview both of the victims, and we just noted some of our findings about the victims. They were both extremely innocent. In fact, my investigators concluded that they were so innocent, almost to the point of being naive. They were factual, extremely factual in their descriptions of what had happened, and their stories corroborated each other. We also, and I think we just noted that, you know, in my experience as DA talking to victims, we noted that these were really two of the nicest people that we had ever gotten the chance to meet in the DA's office. So we reviewed 7 different body worn cameras, and we also looked at 1 media clip. We reviewed the physical evidence, the car, the bodily injuries to the victims, which were consistent with what they had described. And we also reviewed statements made, these were criminal statements made by the police officers. And so we were then at the point that we could make a charging decision. So based upon our consideration of the facts, we have on this morning presented to one of our Superior Court judges 6 arrest warrants for these 6 officers. These are all Atlanta officers, and I'm sure you recognize that 2 of these officers have already been terminated by the Atlanta Police Department. And what we've done is to just in a shorthand method describe the charges against those officers. Lonnie Hood, who's charged with aggravated assault of Messiah Young for the use of the taser, the aggravated assault of Taniya Pilgrim, also for the use of the taser, and also a simple battery for pulling Ms. Pilgrim out of the car onto the paved street. The second officer is Willie Sauls, and charged with aggravated assault of Ms. Pilgrim, and this is for pointing a taser at Mrs. Pilgrim. And as many of you all know, under Georgia law, a taser is considered as a deadly weapon under Georgia law. And also criminal damage to property for the damage and the striking of the window of Miss Pilgrim's car. The third officer, Officer Ivory Streeter, he was one of the officers that was terminated by Chief Shields and Mayor Bottoms, charged with aggravated assault for the use of the taser with respect to Ms. Pilgrim. And also he is charged with a misdemeanor for pointing a gun, a handgun, at Messiah Young. Go to the next one. The other 3 officers, Mark Gardner is one of the officers who was dismissed by the city, and the arrest warrant that we have asked the court to issue against him charges him with aggravated assault of Ms. Pilgrim for the use of the taser. The 5th officer is Armand Jones, who is charged with aggravated battery of Messiah Young, and that is for the forcible removal of him and placing him on the paved street. And the second charge against him is for pointing a gun at Messiah Young. And the 6th officer is Roland Claude, and he is charged with criminal damage to property. He was the officer who broke the window, the driver's side window of the vehicle driven by Messiah Young. And so those are the charges that we have asked the court to sign a warrant for. If you go to the next slide. You know, some people might ask, well, is this the first time that you guys have ever done this? This is not the first time that our office has asked that an officer is charged prior to indictment. We had 2 previous cases, one involving an Atlanta officer, James Burns, who was charged with a homicide. And Mr. Burns, the incident took place on the 22nd of June of 2016. And in that case, we received a video that accurately depicted what happened at the time of the crime. So the incident happened on the 22nd of June, and 25 days later, we asked that he be arrested. He was indicted on the 5th of September of 2018. So he was arrested, as in this case, prior to an indictment. We had a second case involving an East Point officer. The defendant's name was, I think, James Goodine. He was charged with an attempted rape. Our office, through the media, found out that we found out on the 5th of August of 2018 that he had committed this crime. On the 31st of August, we asked that Mr. Goodine be arrested, and he was not indicted until the 22nd of November of 2019. So this is not the first time we have asked that an arrest warrant be issued prior to the time of the indictment. So we have asked the court in each one of these cases to set a bond at $10,000 We've asked that it be a signature bond, and there are two main reasons for this. Number one is we are still suffering from the effects of the virus, and we have been trying to limit the number of people in the Fulton County Jail. So also these are police officers, and we felt that a signature bond, because of those two circumstances, would be appropriate. The officers will, we've asked them to turn themselves in by the end of the day on Friday, and so that they can be processed through the Fulton County Jail.